Cheng Xiaoqi did not mean to make a scene. She meant only to get past the lacquered screens, past the scent of jasmine and sandalwood that clung to the velvet ropes, and to keep her hands from trembling long enough to count the last of the coin in her palm. The purse at her waist was tiny, embroidered by her master's hands, a thing of faded silk and stubborn thread. But in it lived the single paper that mattered, a stamped token from the Nine Heavens sect, the only proof that Master 9 Days' true disciple stood before the auction table. Without it, the seal on the medicine chest could not be opened, and without the chest's seal, there was no access to the Nine-Root Elixir that could, if the rumors were true, stave off even the blackest of poisons for months. So when the hand brushed her lower back and the strap of her purse slid loose, Cheng Xiaoqi's immediate thought was not scandal. It was, with the brutal simplicity of someone who had spent 14 years learning how to save a life with whatever was at hand, not today. The thief was small and quick, a shadow that had learned how to melt into the crowd. He moved like a cut from silk, swift, practiced, but he had the look of someone who expected to vanish into the folds of other people's fortunes. He bolted past the tea stand and knocked over a tray of porcelain. A waiter yelped, and the porcelain made a sound like a tiny bell breaking. Cheng Xiaoqi lunged. She had been trained in the sect's awkward little dances, brush hand strikes and off-balance throws that read like accidents to anyone who watched, and her foot caught the corner of a low display. Silk boxes roared like a wave. A paper fan slapped into the face of a man wearing a mandarin collar and a suit so expensive the stitches had their own skyline. He hissed, and somewhere near the back, a woman dropped her lorgnette with a sound like glass giving up. The thief saw his luck slipping and darted toward the main hall, where the auction was already a hard-blown thing. Folding chairs filled with the city's loudest taste, men with expressions like closed accounts, women who weighed whispers like investments. A stage of lights focused on a carved chest that glinted like a promise. The auctioneer's voice carved the air with urgency. Every word was a currency. The Nine-Root Elixir would be down to its last vial tonight, the lot number skimming through the room like a bird on the wind. Cheng Xiaoqi kept running. The concrete of Cloud City's auction pavilion tasted like dust and old varnish. Her plain cotton shoes skidded, her apron snagged on a fallen silk rope and tore. She sprinted past a display of ornamental umbrellas, long-handled guardians with lacquered grips, and one of them, caught in the convulsion of the crowd, snapped free and twirled. For a second, it became a pale, flapping moon, and Cheng thought, absurdly, of the sect's old sayings about umbrellas dividing fate. She had no time for proverbs now. That was when everyone realized the man in the high-backed chair had moved, and not in the way that the rich move, with instructions and second-hand gestures. He rose. Gu Siyu standing up was like an economy announcing a policy change. He did not shout, he merely rose, smoothing his jacket with one precise motion, and lifted his hand. The room obeyed as if some quiet mandate had been given. Conversations thinned like rain pulling back. A matron with a lorgnette blinked, offended that the show had paused. The auctioneer, a man whose life had been the dramatic cadence of going once, going twice, stiffened and stopped mid-bid. For a moment, the simplest answer seemed right. He would summon guards, he would do what everyone expected the heir of Gu Holdings to do. But then he did something that made people's eyes go unaccountably soft. He stepped down from his balcony, not toward his exit, not toward the velvet ropes protecting him from the masses, but toward the center aisle where the thief had just slipped. It was not a dramatic, cinematic leap. He did not fling himself into the press of bodies like some man of wild movies. He walked. He walked with the uncaring ease of a man who had always been able to purchase solutions and had never needed to consider whether buying created obligations. The crowd made way with the deferential shuffle of people who kept their distance from other people's power. Husbands nudged wives, an usher dropped a clipboard. Cameras, always a habit in Cloud City, found him and swallowed the light. Cheng Xiaoqi had been expecting the opposite, a dry, clipped instruction to secure her and the purse, a peremptory dismissal. What she got, instead, was an acknowledgement so understated it could have been mistaken for insult, except for the way his eyes held. He knelt, without seeming to kneel, at the height of her chest and extended the hem of his umbrella, the enormous black lacquer one that had been folded at his side, over her head like a canopy. It was ridiculous and capacious. He offered it to her as if umbrellas were the most ordinary gift in the world. For the room, it was theater, a man of immeasurable pedigree bestowing a trivial shelter on a damp and badly dressed maid. For Cheng Xiaoqi, who had never walked under such a thing except in stories she was too poor to believe, it felt oddly like recognition. "You're bleeding," he said, and the words were practical in the way of men who manage both hospitals and hostile takeovers. He did not ask her name, he did not demand explanation. Instead, he tapped his fingers against the umbrella, the sound like a coin finding a table. Cheng Xiaoqi blinked. "I'm fine," she panted, half from running and half from being startled into politeness. Her hair had escaped its braid, a smear of ink from a stall flyer had kissed her cheek. She clutched at her apron as if it were still useful. Gu Siyu's voice resonated into the hush. "Stop the auction. Hold all exits until the man with the red scarf is found." The room, which had been a living thing of protocol and commerce, snapped as if a string had been pulled taut. Men straightened. An usher bolted toward the door. The auctioneer, now bereft of his rhythm, swallowed and did as told. "It is only a purse," someone muttered in the crowd. "Partidation, something said to recover the market's normality." But Gu Siyu's lips tightened in a way that made the whisper sound small. He pointed then, not to the thief, but to the little place where Cheng Xiaoqi had fallen. "Bring her here," he said. Collarbones made room, chairs scraped. The matron with the lorgnette tutted. The brocade jacket man tried to remount a bidding heap. A cluster of young men, quick with their phones, recorded everything like it might be a new currency. Yet when Cheng was beside him, when she accepted his umbrella with a proper awkward bow, something quiet shifted in the room. They had not expected him to do anything so small, so unstrategic. "Why would anyone want your purse?" he asked, not unkindly. "It has a token," she said, words coming out like small beads. "From the 9 heavens. My master, Master 9-Day, requires it. The elixir." He narrowed his eyes the way a man tests a ledger when numbers smell wrong. "The 9-Root Elixir," he finished for her, because the word had floated through more than one private conversation and lodged in the public air of the city in the last few days. "You came for that." Cheng's face might have been a drawing of desperation and stubbornness. She had never been good at disguises beyond the basics. For a heartbeat, she considered telling him nothing, letting him remain one of the impossible things at the edges of her world. But the truth is a heavy thing, and when someone's throat was closing like a door the way Master 9 Days had been, excuses felt like splinters. "Yes," she said, "Master is ill. The token says he is the true disciple. Without proof, they will not release the medicine." Gu Siyu listened, and the angle of his jaw became unreadable. There were rumors, after all, that he collected such things for reasons that had nothing to do with medicine: reputation, unusual philanthropy, power. There were also rumors that he was not moved by small people's tragedies. The auction hall had its inventory of gossip, and this new entry was delicious. Then, without a flourish, he did something utterly unexpected. He reached into his jacket and took from an inner pocket a small leather box. He did not open it for the audience. He did not brandish it. He presented it to the usher with the same slow, unhurried movement with which a man signs off on mergers. "On the table," he said. "Reserve it. Do not open until I return." The usher, who had seen much of Cloud City's weather, did not ask why. He placed the box atop the auction table with ceremonial gravity. The auctioneer's hackles rose. There was a silence like a held note.
"You have 5 minutes to catch the thief," Ga Siyu told the assembled and suddenly attentive crowd. "Bring him to me. If the purse is returned intact, there will be compensation." People shifted. The word compensation turned into a rumor that spilled like a dropped coin. They began to count what compensation could mean, how it might ripple through their own small economies. No one remembered that Ga Siyu had, not half a minute before, been a man in an elevated box. He had become a man who could, with a flick, make doors close and open. He had decided to gamble his wealth on the ministrations of a maid. Cheng Xiaoqi stared. The city had a flattering habit of expecting gratitude in the shape of servile bows from those underfoot. But the look that crossed his face was not grand or cruel. It was as if he had lit a lamp in a room he had not thought to enter before. "Wait," she managed. "The thief, he ran toward the alley, stage left." Ga Siyu turned his umbrella so that it shaded them both. The umbrella towered over them like a token itself. Black lacquer, its ribs sleek as the variegated canals that divided the Ga conglomerate's property. "Stay here," he instructed, and then he strode, not running, not urgent, but with a measured pace, toward the rear of the hall. Cheng watched him go. He did not shout for guards to chase. He walked as a man who wanted to see for himself. The sight of him moving among the crowd unsettled more than the theft had. He wore a tension like a cloak, and the cloak surprised people into not breathing wrong. Someone shoved a camera into her face, young, hungry eyes wild behind a lens, and asked, breathless, "Miss, are you a thief-catcher?" She wanted to retort that she had no such title, only a master, a token, and a very bad day. She thought of the master's hands, scarred and small, and of the way his laugh used to split the morning air into two. She held the umbrella a little tighter, as if it might become armor. Outside, the city's alleys were a tangle of neon and steam. They smelled of fried dough and old money. The thief could be lost in them, if permitted, but Cloud City tended to funnel desperate things back to a few doors. The security men, with their lanyards swinging like pendulums of jurisdiction, burst through the rear doors in a way that made piccolo horns of their shouts. A scrap of red cloth caught on a stair rail promised a direction. Ga Siyu found the alley alone. The thief had slipped.
He did not look surprised. Instead, he let his umbrella close slowly, like a book shutting. His hands moved with the peculiar negligence of someone who had everything, and therefore treated nothing as easily lost. He stood, tall and odd, in the half-light, and when Cheng Xiaoqi joined him, hair plastered, apron dulled with the city's dust, she realized she was panting, but steady, as always, like the steadying of a small, trusted thing. Many in Cloud City took to theft out of habit, others out of design. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not guilt, but a ledger of debts. The thief's shoulders pitched. He swallowed. They said the token was worth more than money. I thought, his voice frayed, it is only a scrap. Cheng smiled, not a victory smile, but the worn, necessary sort. Proof is not a scrap. She reached for the purse. He hesitated, and then, with a clumsy honesty she had come to respect, he handed it over. The purse was damp with someone else's sweat. The embroidered threads were fraying. When she opened it, for one breath, she was seized by a joy so sharp it tasted like metal. There it was, the edge of the token, the seal like a small sun pressed against paper. Her fingers brushed it, and something in her chest stepped forward as if the world had rebalanced. She closed the purse and held it to her belt like a talisman. The thief watched her like a man who had not expected gratitude. The city hummed around them, indifferent and generative. Later, when she returned to the auction hall and felt the Gu balcony's pale light wash over her once more, all the people who had stared at Gu Siyu's odd generosity now had new things to consider. They saw a man who could have used his money invisibly, who instead had put it where everyone could see. They saw a girl with a torn apron who had run through the heart of their commerce and come back holding what she had needed. Gu Siyu met her at the threshold, his umbrella tucked now, as if it had been used once and understood what it meant to be useful. There was no applause. The auction resumed with the delicate economy of people who had watched an interruption and wanted to pretend it had not happened. But beneath the rhythm of gavel and cloth, a different calculation had begun. "You have something that matters," he said quietly, and the words hung between them as if the entire city might listen. "Come with me. There is paperwork to ensure the token is recognized. The 9 heavens seal will be verified." Cheng Xiaoqi's laugh was short and not entirely of amusement. Master 9 Days' handwriting had been a map to a life she would have thought too small for Gu Siyu's attention, and yet here they were, 2 people from different ledgers standing for a moment on the same line. She slipped the token back into the purse and tucked her hands inside her sleeves against the chill. "Master," she began, and the sentence wanted to be long and filled with all the reasons a person does what cannot be bought. But she stopped, because this moment, like many dangerous things, required economy of speech. Gu Siyu inclined his head, emotion disguised as courtesy, but feeling unexpectedly like trust. "We will move swiftly," he said. "There are things I will ask of the 9 heavens registry that money alone cannot secure. Prepare what you must." She wondered what those things might be. The rituals, the seals, the way the master's body had become less a thing of flesh and more a calendar she could no longer keep. She thought of the price the elixir demanded in the stories, a ritual that often preferred debt to naked exchange, a condition that sometimes required more than coin, sometimes required proximity, sometimes a token of union, sometimes an admission of ownership by another heart. She slid into step beside him as they walked toward the private office where the Gu family met debt and charity with the same hand. The crowd parted the way the sea parts for an oared boat. Cameras flashed like distant thunder. As the auction's lights continued their sales, a nameless man in a brocade jacket muttered to his neighbor, "Did you see him? The air, just..." He trailed off because the thing had no ready category. How do you name a man who offers public aid to someone without asking her origin, and then walks beside her as if they had always been coordinates in the same map? Gu Siyu's reaction had surprised everyone for a reason that would unfurl in ways neither of them could measure. It felt like the first small break in a dam. It felt, absurdly and quietly, like the beginning of a debt that might be repaid in some other coin. For Cheng Xiaoqi, the token was a warm weight against her side. It had saved the first part of her day. But the world beyond the auction had alarmingly complicated demands. Master 9 Days' health, the strange rules of 9 heavens that sometimes required unlikely sacrifices, and the simmering presence of an impostor whose timing was too convenient to be mere coincidence. When they stepped into the Gu private office, Gu Siyu closed the door with a soft, definitive motion, and for the first time that day looked less like a ledger and more like a man about to make a decision that might cost him something he had not planned to spend. He set the leather box he had earlier placed on the table, beside the purse. It sat there like a punctuation mark. "We verify the token," he said. "Then we acquire the elixir. Then we arrange for Master 9 Days' treatment. I will oversee it myself." Cheng Xiaoqi's fingers tightened on the purse. "Why would you? Why would you help?" she asked, finally, because the city had taught her to ask before believing. His gaze met hers with an economy of words. "Because someone had better," he replied. "Because wealth is a tool, and sometimes tools are used to open doors." Neither of them spoke about the rumor that had been slanting the auction. Zhang Ruoli's name had been thrown like a stone into many conversations. Her claims of discipleship and rights to certain medicines heard earlier among the more delicate gossipers. No one had proof. Rumor was not evidence. But the city liked its rumors for the way they shifted traffic and opened pockets. Gu Siyue tapped the umbrella's lacquered handle, thinking, perhaps for the first time in a long while, of how a small action could disarrange an entire ledger. He did not yet know what he would ask of Cheng Xiaoqi when the token's verification demanded a signature of intent. He did not know that helping a maid could begin to untie a knot of obligations he had kept tightly knotted for decades. He only knew that the token was in her hands, and that, for reasons he did not yet understand, that fact felt like an answer to a question he had not realized he had posed. Outside the open window, the city kept its commerce and its small mercies. The auction would resume, and tomorrow the brokers would tally which way the winds had blown. Inside, 2 different people constructed an arrangement born of urgency and the strange mutual arithmetic of need. They had no idea, neither of them, how the evening's small theater would widen into the grander scenes the city wrote when people tried to rescue one another. They only had the token, the umbrella, and a private room that smelled faintly of citrus polish. And in the alleyways of Cloud City, where rumors are the city's true currency, a rumor began to take shape. That the heir of Gu Holdings had stood in the middle of an auction, not to protect a ledger, but to shelter a maid beneath his umbrella. The city noted it down with interest, for Cloud City collects such things and calls them the beginning of stories. Cheng Xiaoqi placed the token on the polished table between them and watched Gu Siyue's pupils narrow just enough to show he was thinking. The clock in the private office ticked. Outside, the Nine-Root Elixir waited in a sealed chest on a stage that smelled of old promises. Inside, an old man coughed with the cadence of lost time. "Do what you must," Cheng said, not yet brave enough to say more, because in the spaces where pity and power met, words are heavy and often clumsy. Gu Siyue inclined his head once, an unostentatious promise. "We will begin tonight." A footnote to the day. Somewhere beyond the private office doors, a woman in a brocade jacket muttered the city's favorite small question into her hand. What will he do next? No one could tell, not then. But when the CEO had watched a maid chase a thief, and then, with the oddness of a man unaccustomed to messy kindness, stood and made what everyone thought was a surprising, uncalculating move, when he had descended from his balcony and shaded a running maid, people had leaned forward in their seats and marked the moment as one worth remembering. Guia de estilo e instruções para a síntese. Você é narrador, palestrante com voz potente, forte e autoritária. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. Contexto de continuidade. A frase anterior era "And mark the moment as one worth remembering." Você está no meio de uma frase-pensamento. Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. They had not yet seen the ledger that would follow. They had not yet seen the strings tied to the Nine-Root Elixir, the master's whispered conditions, or the imposter's smile rehearsed to steal opportunity. They had not yet seen the bargain that might twist gratitude into the more complicated currency of obligation. For now, a sacrifice was simple. Find the elixir, secure the cure, return a breath to a failing chest. For now, a purse and a token and a peculiar, surprising reaction by a man who did not lean were enough to set very particular forces moving. Outside, rain began, soft as a rumor. Inside, the token sat between them, and the private office's light made it look like a small altar. The curtain of the city drew a breath, and for the first time in days, Master 9 Days' coughing paused into a thinner, watchful silence. They both knew the night was only beginning. Gu Siyue folded the umbrella under his arm and let the private room's lamp throw a long oval of light over the token. He did not speak while he took from his pocket a thin leather folio, business hours and habits adhered to even in emergencies, and a pen whose weight he had known since boyhood. The city beyond the window had halted to the scale of rain and rumor. Inside, the small ritual of signature felt sacramental. Cheng Xiaoqi watched him as if the angle of his wrist might tilt fate. "You may sit with him for a moment," Gu said at last, surprising them both with the gentleness in his tone. "I will move the chest." Cheng's hand tightened on the token. It had been her father's before it was hers, if rumor could be believed. It was stamped with an arrangement of lines that meant something beyond law to those who still bent their knees to old masters. She swallowed and nodded, rising with the kind of slow, deliberate motion one makes when answering a summons more solemn than words. They left the room together, and the corridor smelled of citrus polish and the damp breath of the city. In the outer hall, the auction continued, on a stage flanked by spotlights and men in neat suits who measured value by the cadence of applause. The Nine-Root Elixir sat in its chest beneath paper banners that promised efficacy and blurred provenance. The auctioneer, hatched from the breed that could point at a jar and make an entire audience begin to worship, was on his third round of salesmanship, his voice oil-smooth. Brokers in the front rows flipped electronic tabs. Elsewhere, other hands counted the ledger in private. Gu did not join the crowd. He crossed to the side where an assistant in a dark coat kept a list. The assistant, a woman with a practiced frown, glanced at the token in Cheng's palm when Cheng passed it forward, and her expression flickered in a way that had nothing to do with surprise and everything to do with recognition. "You have the master's token?" she asked, low. Cheng nodded. "We need the elixir for Master 9-Day.
Guia de estilo e instruções para a síntese de fala. Você é narrador, palestrante, com voz potente, forte e autoritária. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. Contexto de continuidade. A frase anterior era "Nodded. We need the elixir for Master 9-Day." Você está no meio de uma frase, pensamento. Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal, sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. He cannot wait. The woman's eyes softened for an instant. Name? Cheng Xiaoqi, Gu Siye will vouch. Gu signed. He did not write his full name as the world expected. It was unnecessary to print titles, and yet the stroke was clear enough. He had always measured things in ledgers and obligations. Tonight he measured a different account, one whose sums were gratitude and danger. When he set the pen down, the assistant nodded and moved as if to call the auction master, then hesitated. "You understand what the token demands," she said, cautious. "There are conditions for transfer, conditions that the holder must accept." He did understand. The city's murmurs had sketched possible meanings: service, obedience, a pledge of fealty. Gu folded his hands over the folio and felt the leather creak. He had not yet decided what he would sign away. He had not decided whether anything could be purchased with ink. But the alternative, waiting, watching the old man's breath grow thinner in the hush of a house that worshipped profit, was not an option he could permit for long. "Name them," he said. The assistant's voice was practical, clipped. "A witness for the transfer must be recorded. The elixir leaves the stage only when a binding signature is affixed, and a steward is named to receive it. The token confirms authority, but not the absence of obligations. Also," her glance slid to Cheng, "there is a clause regarding immediate custody when the master's life is at stake. It becomes, for a period, the steward's responsibility to administer the remedy under oversight." Cheng swallowed. She looked at Gu. There was no theatrical pleading. Her face held a quietness forged of chores done at dawn, of bowls washed in baths of memory. "I will be the steward." A small noise ran through the assistant's face like a stone through still water. "You can, but it will be recorded. The house keeps records. There will be signatures, witnesses, a temporary lien." "Do it," Gu said. His voice was only a fraction colder than the composition of money he'd spent in boardrooms and at charity drives. "If words can keep a life, let them. If a ledger must be opened to close a breath, then sign it open." There is a moment, a legalist's hinge, when the machinery of commerce waits for consent. The assistant prepared the form and slid it toward them. Cheng took the pen with hands that trembled at the edges, but not enough to blur ink. She signed her name beneath a clause that read thinly of duty and thicker of consequence.
Gu signed in the space that asked for guarantee and contact. His name would be the fulcrum others would press against if the arrangement tipped into dispute. The crowd sensed a shift. A rumor is a living thing, and crowds attend to living things with the same hunger they reserve for spectacle. Someone near the stage whispered a name, and it rippled outward. The heir of Gu Holdings had placed himself in the transaction. The house, efficient as always, called for the chest. The stage manager, bald, with a voice like a bell at the market, beckoned the stewards to the platform. 2 men in suits bore the chest down the aisle to a small table under the main light. They set it carefully, and the auctioneer draped another banner over his arm, as if laying a ruler on a map. "And now," the auctioneer proclaimed, voice bright, "for which names shall its life be pledged?" A woman in a brocade jacket moved through the audience with the confidence of someone accustomed to drawing the eyes of men who liked drama better than truth. She had been the brocade murmurer beyond the private office. She arrived now with a small retinue and a face made up to a single expression: calculation. Her eyes found Cheng and Gu like a predator smelling a sudden weakness. "You will excuse me," she called out, voice clear enough to halt the chatter. "But that token, does it not belong also to the disciple Zhang Ruoli? The master's last wishes were spoken, were they not, before he fell? There are witnesses." A hush shuddered over the hall. The auctioneer smiled, the kind of smile that always leaves a trapdoor behind it. "Claims of right are always in order," he said. "One must present proof, of course. Tokens, testimonies, any legal instrument will be considered. The house will not. Nor will the knight steal what belongs where it rightly should," the brocade woman said. She was not Zhang Ruoli. She carried a letter instead, a thin scroll folded and sealed. She produced it with the flourish of an exhibitor and laid it on the table, letting the seal hover like a question over the token. Cheng felt something sour in her mouth. That seal, old ink, familiar calligraphy, might be genuine. It might be a forgery. Cloud City's market for vintage authority had taught many hands to copy the marks that opened doors. The woman's retinue, 2 men with soft smiles, stood poised like judges. Gu's jaw tightened. He understood what a forged paper could become in an auction hall, a weapon sharpened by lawyers and rumor. But he also understood that to contest the seal in the open would be to invite delay the master could ill afford. "Is Zhang Ruoli present?" Gu asked, and the question had the disciplinary edge of a court command. The brocade woman smiled, as if she had been waiting for permission to act. "She is not present tonight," she said, "but a disciple does not always stand in person to claim what is right." The auctioneer tapped his ledger with a practiced rhythm. "The house recognizes claims supported by testimonies or tokens. The token before us is valid for the master's heir, if the house so deems. But if there is dispute, an adjournment may be necessary." Adjournment. The word sounded like a clock striking many times over the master's chest. Gu felt the tight inward clench that dealt only with things measured in breaths and ledgers.
Guia digestivo e instruções para síntese de fala. Você é narrador, palestrante, com voz potente, forte e autoritária. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável.
No meio de uma frase ou pensamento, mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. Eo would extend how much power he would let the House hold. An adjournment here was a formal delay that could be used as a negotiating instrument by those who coveted the elixir or wished to milk the value of rumor. He could have paid. He could have turned to his phone. He did not. He had not yet needed to. Issued a set of instructions that would make the House blink and obey. Instead, he did something smaller, less expected. He unfolded his umbrella and stepped forward so that he stood squarely between Cheng and the brocade woman. "This elixir," he said, voice steady, "is for Master 9-Day. He is in my care." The phrase was not strictly true in any legal sense, but the market respects the appearance of custody as much as it does ink. If there is to be a hearing, make it brief. If there is proof, present it now. Behind the brocade woman, one of her men produced a ledger of his own. Witnesses, scribes, the faint smell of ink. He began to read aloud a passage, a contract of discipleship, whose clauses had the comfortable rustle of old-time worship, declaring the master's last trust to Cheng Xiaoqi. The crowd leaned in as if to receive a sermon. Cheng stepped forward so abruptly that Gu felt the impulse like a nudge. "I was there," she said, voice small but pitched into the room's acoustics. "I have poured his tea. I have warmed his pillows. The master's trust is not only in words written in a room distant from his bed. He entrusted me when breath left him lighter." Her eyes found the brocade woman's, steady now with a courage that knew how to carry weight. "You will not take what he needs to be whole." Whether it was innocence or nerve, the audience loved the simplicity of the claim. Murmurs passed like a breeze. The brocade woman's smile thinned. "You speak as if you had power in a house that trades in paper and proof," she said. "Do you have the master's seal?" Cheng lifted the token then, as if exposing the truth the city itself could not deny. The token caught the light and glowed, a tiny, stubborn sun. The hall exhaled. Merchants who had been ready to bet on rumor now recalculated. For many, the token was not merely charm, but guarantee. But the brocade woman did not falter. She placed a second paper on the table and asked for verification. And the auctioneer, practical always, signaled for the house's notary, a man at the back in spectacles, who bore the kind of impartiality that still made a living. He took the documents, compared seals, cross-checked the ink. Gu watched the notary's fingers move like a metronome. The moment stretched. Outside, rain struck the glass with a new insistence. The city watched. The old man on the hospital bed, wherever he slept and coughed his nights, was a fragile axis on which the next plays would pivot. The notary finally looked up. "The token appears to be genuine," he said. "But the certificate," he tapped the brocade woman's paper, "cites a prior assignment. If it is upheld, the House may be required to defer. If not..." He spread his hands in the language of someone sworn to arithmetic and contingency. Before anyone could decide which contingency to favor, a different sound slashed through the polite war of papers. A shout, then the furious clatter of feet. A man in a damp coat, one of the stagehands perhaps, or a night thief, leaped onto the stage, his hand clasping at the chest. Security moved like predatory geometry. For a heartbeat, the hall held its breath as if at the sight of a man attempting sacrilege. Cheng's first reaction was to lunge. Gu caught her by the elbow and held her back, not because he mistrusted her, but because he had seen too many people break themselves trying to rescue others. He had never liked the cost of impulsive heroics. Tonight, perhaps, would teach him whether he could afford to start. Security wrestled the man down. He was small and wild-eyed, muttering that the chest smelled like money and medicine in equal parts. The stagehands swore and sealed the chest anew, as if the presence of hands near it had contaminated its integrity. The auctioneer, unruffled, declared an emergency recess and signaled for the house's protocols, extra witnesses, signatures, a new round of verification. The brocade woman's retinue closed like parentheses. The crowd rearranged itself into a more dangerous shape. Gu felt urgency sharpen into a physical thing. There was another option, one that required no argument in a court, no slow translation of seals. He could call on favors, deploy resources that were not public ledger but private influence. He could take the chest himself and leave the house to measure wrongs later. That, too, would be a kind of signature. The assistant who had first spoken to them lingered at the side, her face now shaded by a professional worry. "There are cameras," she said, and the words seemed to belong to a different night entirely. Modernities rearranging the ancient commerce of rumor. "Whatever you do will be recorded. The house will—" She stopped, searching his face. Gu met her look. For the first time that night, the math of his life in ledgers and power and public opinion compressed into something like tenderness. "I will sign whatever they need," he said, "but I will not let a man rise on the back of a theft." Her mouth quirked as if a decision had been made. "Then be swift. The house will insist on procedure." They moved then, Cheng with the token tucked to her chest like armor, Gu around her as both shield and guarantor, toward the stage. The auctioneer, with the smile of one who profits from every twist, did not stop them. Perhaps he snarled inwardly at the idea of losing a spectacle to simple decency. Perhaps he recognized that some audiences prefer heroism to litigation. As they approached, a noise rose up in the hall that was not the kind of murmuring they had all heard before.
It was the ragged sound of someone laughing thinly and addressing a room like a congregation. From a shadowed aisle, a figure emerged, lean, with hair tied back and eyes that held a bright, dangerous intelligence. The crowd took another step, its curiosity pliant. "Ah," the figure said, voice soft as silk and sharp as wire. "So much ceremony over a jar." The brocade woman's smile flickered into annoyance. "Who are you to speak of ceremony?" she demanded. The newcomer inclined his head with a mock courtesy. "A fan of mastercraft," he said. He carried no papers, no seals. He carried instead a box the size of a glove, which he set upon the table with a deliberate air of replacement. "If you must verify," he said, "verify this." The auctioneer's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" "Proof," the man said simply, "or a better bargain." He lifted the lid, and inside was not the Nine-Root Elixir, but a small vial wrapped in silk, its surface catching the stage light and throwing back a little mocking sun.
The audience leaned in, the brocade woman's retinue straightened, the notary adjusted his spectacles as if to measure that the world had suddenly become an argument. Cheng felt her breath thin. The room smelled for a second not of citrus polish, but of iron and fear. Gu's hand found hers, and the skin contact was a small, dangerous truth. The new man smiled, as if the whole city were a toy he had come to unmask. "This," he said, "is the elixir you seek. Or perhaps it is a lie. We will know which soon enough." The auctioneer's clap for drama was involuntary. "You claim the elixir?" "I claim nothing," the man said. "I only prove that more than one truth can be poured into a bottle." Outside, the rain grew harder. In the room, the chest sat between parties, as inert and accusing as a coffin. 1,000 small calculations began to turn. The house's liability, the brocade woman's paper, the token in Cheng's palm, the man with the silk-wrapped vial, and the way his smile suggested that in Cloud City nothing sacred was beyond the price of testing. Gu felt the night fold like a ledger whose pages would not stay put. The pen in his hand seemed suddenly childish, complicit. He could not tell yet what clause his signature would bind, beyond the immediate. A life perhaps saved, a debt incurred, a rumor worsened into something that would be harder to unwind. He could not know whether the bottle on the stage would be the medicine that returns a breath, or the bait that lured him into an arrangement he would regret. He only knew what he had known when he stepped from his balcony. That warmth, sheltered under an umbrella, had become an obligation not of law. He took a breath, and then another, and set his shoulders to the night. Around him, the city kept its ledger, and the auctioneer, as ever, counted the cost of a pause.